Hello, I'm Shinobu Kitayama. I'm the 2021 president of APS. It's my great honor and pleasure to give an award, William James Award, to Micki Chi. Micki Chi is Regent Professor, Dorothy Bray Endowed Professor of Science and Teaching at Arizona State University. Professor Chi is a cognitive and learning science researcher interested in active learning, defined as ways in which students engage with learning materials. She has developed a framework for active learning called ICAP that differentiates students' overt engagement activities into four kinds. One, collaborative, interactive. Two, generative, constructive. Three, manipulative, active. And four, attentive, passive. And predict that I leads to C, C in turn leads to A, which in turn leads to P. Professor Chi is also interested in instructional videos for online learning and proposes that videos of tutorial dialogues are more effective for students learning than didactic monologue videos. Her research centers on students' learning of concepts in STEM domains, focusing on emergent concepts for which students hold robust misconceptions. Professor Chi is the director of the Learning and Cognition Lab at ASU. One of her research projects involves devising and implementing a professional development module for teachers to create lesson activities that promote greater and deeper learning and facilitate certain modes of engagement behaviors in students. The framework that her team provides is based on previous empirical work that demonstrate the success of designing activities that foster types of engagement they identify. The goal is to implement these modules remotely so that teachers design activities within their lesson plans tailored to specific disciplines, such as courses in science. Professor Chi is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Academy of Education. Congratulations, Micki.
I'm deeply honored today to be receiving the William James Fellow Award from APS. I want to thank APS President Shinobu Kitayama for presenting this award to me. I'm going to take the next 13 to 14 minutes to highlight a few of my studies over the years. My work has always been about learning, in particular learning of authentic new information, often school-based content, versus arbitrary sentences, with measures of deep learning, for example, and versus measures of retention. I focus mostly on understanding conceptual knowledge versus procedural knowledge. And in my work, I like to offer new interpretations and take alternative perspectives, the child versus adults, the novices versus the experts, and the students versus the teacher. My research is focused on two aspects of learning. The first aspect is the role and impact of knowledge in learning. I claim that knowledge facilitates recall and development, for example, and I show that children with a lot of knowledge about chess can recall more chess pieces than adults with a little bit of knowledge of chess. But the same children recall fewer digits than adults. So therefore, recall seems to be affected by the knowledge and not so much by maturation. I also claim that more knowledge tends to be better organized, thereby leading to improved recall. I showed in a within subject design comparing a child's recall of 20 more familiar dinosaurs with 20 less familiar dinosaurs. And we found enhanced recall for the more familiar ones. We then devised a network analysis to capture the organization of the more and less familiar dinosaurs and found the more familiar one to be much better and coherently organized. We later showed that experts' greater knowledge is organized around the principles underlying structure versus knowledge of surface features. For example, novices would claim that these two problems that are shown are the same, but experts would say they're not the same. So the experts' organization based on the principle actually facilitate problem solving versus the alternative hypothesis that they have better reasoning skills. One of my current projects studies the absence of critical knowledge. Sometimes students fail to learn. It's not because they have less knowledge or less well-organized knowledge, but it can be due to the complete absence of an entire critical schema. So for decades, the literature has found that students fail to learn many science concepts. The question is why? We have developed a new framework for understanding, analyzing process concepts, especially science processes. Notice that most studies in the literature actually study entity concepts, not process concepts. Process concepts can be defined by 5 dimensions besides the dimension of time, such as the pattern. You can see a straight line, a Q pattern down below. The agents, you can see the ants and the wolves, the agents' interactions, the relations among the agents' interaction, and the causal relations between the agents' interactions and the pattern. That is, how is the pattern produced? The problem is the 5th dimension. Students explain that the two similar looking patterns, ants foraging and wolves hunting and prey, are created in the same way. But in fact, they're created by distinctly different processes. One is causal, the other one we can call acausal. Wolves hunting creates a line, but an accumulating process, as more and more wolves join the chase over time sequentially. Ants foraging in a line, on the other hand, is created by a collective process as all the ants converge over time in an emergent acausal way. So lacking knowledge of this acausal emergent mechanism leads to robust misconceptions of many science concepts, and as documented in 5 decades of published work. So our explanation is in contrast to the prevailing assumption that science process concepts are simply just inherently more difficult to learn. The second aspect of my research on learning is to investigate how do students interact with instruction or instructional materials while learning. I'm going to talk about an effective way, 2 less effective ways, a potentially most effective way, and the ICAP hypothesis. I've noticed that all texts are incomplete. The dotted lines here actually show the missing information of an excellent 8th grade text based on a structural behavior function analysis of the text sentences. So the curiosity is, how can students overcome missing information and learn when all texts have missing information? So we observed how students learn to overcome missing information. One effective way to learn is for students to explain the sentences to themselves. Self-explaining, that's what I call it, is a way of generating inferences from prior knowledge and connecting new information presented in the learning materials with prior knowledge. Self-explaining belongs to a class of constructive activities in which knowledge is generated beyond what was presented in instruction. A constructive activity often display overt behaviors and visible outputs. So some examples of other constructive activities include drawing a diagram. So the diagram is an output, or posing a question. So the posed question is an output. These activities all generate some new information beyond what is provided in the instruction. Self-explaining definitely enhances learning, especially deeper understanding. In the figure, the blue line shows the correct responses by the high-frequency explainers, especially for the more difficult inference questions, the 3rd category questions on the right, versus the easier questions. The 2 yellow arrows shows the big difference between the inference question on the right, between the high and low frequency explainers, and the small arrows on the left for the easy questions. And the biggest difference shows up in the inference question, which also suggests that the high frequency explainers are definitely generating inferences. To confirm that self-explaining is beneficial, not just that some people are prone to be high self-explainers, we prompted students to self-explain. The left column shows the overall gains of unprompted, the purple bar, versus the prompted bar, the green bar. And the right column shows that the difference is even more pronounced for the more difficult questions for the prompted students of the purple compared to the green who are not prompted. So undertaking self-explaining, as I've shown, and other constructive activities is an extremely effective way to learn. There are 2 less effective, but the most common ways of engaging to learn. One we call the active mode, which is physically manipulating existing information in a selective way without adding any new inferred knowledge. For example, you could be copying notes to solution. You could be repeating sentences or selecting an option. The other is the passive mode, which is paying attention to instruction without doing anything else. So you could be listening attentively, watching a video, or reading silently. Potentially, the most effective way to learn is collaboratively by interacting with a peer. But the way of interacting is crucial. To be beneficial, collaborators must interact with a peer in a co-constructive or co-generative way, meaning that both partners must each be generative. So why is co-generation the most effective? When a student is working alone, she can be generative and infer some new knowledge, such as the purple node I, after connecting some prior knowledge, node P, and new knowledge, node N, and express it in her notes. But when two students collaborate, not only can each generate inferences, such as a purple node X inferred by the left peer, but then the other partner can infer purple node Y from encoding X and linking X with his node N. So the inference Y is not something the left partner thought of to generate. So the advantage of collaboration is not the availability of complementary knowledge, some of the prevailing views suggest that, but building on partners' inferences, resulting in knowledge Y that neither partner could create on their own. This potentially leads to innovation. By the way, this way of collaborating is opposite of what's recommended for brainstorming, which is not to build on the other person's contributions. So the 4 ways of engaging, the effective ways, 2 less effective ways, and the potentially the most effective collaborative way, based on overt behaviors and visible outputs, along with assumptions of what thinking processes might occur for each mode of engagement, as well as the subsuming nature of the behaviors, all suggest that these 4 ways of engaging lead to the hypothesis that learning decreases from interactive to constructive to active to passive, or what we call ICAP. We tested our hypothesis and show in a single study on learning some engineering concepts that vary the activities across the 4 ways of engaging, that there was an 8 to 10% incremental increase across the 4 modes, as predicted. Improvement within each mode of activity was measured by pre-test in the blue bars to post-test shown in the red bars. The hypothesis ICAP predicts hundreds of laboratory and classroom studies in the literature. Many laboratory studies compare 2 of the 4 ICAP modes as conditions. In this study, for example, by Laguerre-Lombrazzo, children were asked to observe a crank turning gears, or observe the crank turning gears and explain how it turns gears, with no feedback. Both groups of children were then asked to explain the causal relations between the crank and the gears. The left figure shows that the observing group, the green bar, performed significantly less well than the explained group, the red bar, which suggests that constructive is better than passive. Within the explaining groups, some only describe the gears in a crank, while others try to explain it, whether correct or incorrect. The right panel shows that the describers perform much less well than explainers because constructive is better than active, that it's describing is only active. So ICAP's predictions are accurate across various tasks and content domains, ages, and grade levels. It can also be applied and used for evaluating teaching, assessing students' performance, explaining other phenomena, such as mind wandering. It can also enable the discovery of a new learning paradigm, especially one useful for online learning. One of my current direction is to advance the idea that closing the research practice gap requires effortful translation research consisting of 12 components involving researchers, teachers, and students. For example, the research needs to develop a theory or identify robust phenomena and seek evidence to support it. The researchers have to develop instruction for teachers and develop assessment of teachers' understanding. The teachers then have to design the lesson plans and assess the development of the design. And then they have to implement the lesson plans. The researchers have to develop assessment for the fidelity of their implementation. Finally, the students have to enact it, and then researchers have to assess how they comply with the enactment, with the design. Finally, students have to learn, and we have to develop assessment to measure the learning. So it's a very complicated, extensive research project. Thank you so much for honoring me with the William James Fellow Award this year.